from the All Indiana Podcast Network.
It's time for real conversation about the real issues that affect our communities.
Poverty, education, equality, and more.
This is Real Talk.
Real Talk with Rev Charles Harrison.
Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network, and I'm Rev Charles Harrison. And on this episode, we're going to talk about that taboo in the Black community, which is to talk about the issue of Black-on-Black violence and why, after 60 years, we have not solved this problem yet in our community in dealing with the onslaught of Black men being killed in this country. Welcome to Real Talk on the All Indiana Podcast Network, and I am Rev Charles Harrison, and I'm with you today, and this is my podcast. I am in the studio at Wish TV in Indianapolis, and I am on this podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network, and I've been doing this for a little over a year now, doing this podcast, and I certainly want to thank Wish TV for allowing me to do this podcast in their studio. It is a platform for me as what I consider myself a moderate Black leader. I'm the pastor of Barnes United Methodist Church. I've done urban ministry now for 31 years in Indianapolis. I'm going into my 32nd year. This is the second time I've done urban ministry. I pastored when I was in seminary in Columbus, Ohio, and also my background growing up in the Jeffersonville area, which is right across the bridge from Louisville, Kentucky. It is an area that I'm familiar with growing up there, and certainly I have some good and bad memories growing up in the Jeffersonville area. In today's podcast, I want to deal with what is probably a taboo in the Black community, and it creates dissension among us when we talk about this whole issue of Black-on-Black violence. For many leaders, they are offended in the Black community just by that concept to talk about this issue of Black-on-Black violence. They don't believe that violence in the Black community is any different from violence in any other community. But I beg to differ with them. I do think the numbers show that there is concern about what's happening in Black America, particularly in urban cities or large cities across the country. Whether you live in Indianapolis or Columbus, Ohio, or Chicago or Louisville, Kentucky, or Birmingham, or Los Angeles, we can just go down the list of major cities where we tend to see large numbers of African American males in particular who tend to be the victims of violence. And sadly, most of that is gun violence. We're being disproportionately impacted as Black Americans by the gun violence. And it's really been going on for about 60 years now. And I get a lot of criticism because I'm willing to talk about what some in our community don't want to talk about. I'm willing to be truthful about what's happening in our community. For some leaders, and particularly some of the younger community activists, sometimes they butt heads with me and some clergy and some of our political leaders, because I'm willing to say what's really going on in the community. I'm interested in solutions. I'm interested in ending this violence that is tearing our community apart. And it really hasn't gotten better over the last 60 years. It goes up and down. Some years, the violence is high. It could be record breaking. Then it may go down a little. And then, we have politicians who are celebrating because, we didn't have 270. We had 240. So that's cause for celebration. Or we didn't have 400 homicides. We only had 350 homicides. So we tend to celebrate in the community. And in most large cities, the reality of it is that 70 to 80% of the victims of homicides in a lot of these large cities are African American. That is just true. You turn on the TV and you watch the news, whether you watch it in the morning or in the afternoon or at nighttime, and sadly, on the news, we have these non-fatal shootings or we have these criminal homicides or homicides, people being killed. And too often when you look, it is the face of the black man. It is the face of the black man. The black man has become the face of this violence that we're seeing in larger cities across the country. Now, here's why I dispute with a lot of people. Sometimes they come at me and I don't mind it. I'm a big boy. I can take it. I'm a pastor of a large church here in Indianapolis in one of the roughest neighborhoods in the city. I come out of the Jeffersonville, Louisville, Kentucky area. I had a 21-year-old brother who was killed in Louisville, Kentucky. 20-something years later, his son, who was only 6 months old at the time, ended up getting killed the same way his father did. That vicious cycle in Louisville, Kentucky. I've had cousins who have been killed. I've been affected by the gun violence my family has. So I'm not just talking just to be talking. I'm talking about something that I have experienced, that I know about, growing up in those environments. I've been on this planet now for 6 decades now. So I've been a part of this 60-year problem in Black America when it comes to the whole issue of Black-on-Black violence. This is why I say it's a problem. When you look at the homicide rates by race, when we talk about race, per 100,000, by race, this is what it looks like. Black Americans are being killed at 33.6 per 100,000. American Indians and Alaskan Native persons are being killed per 100,000 at 12.9%. Hispanics in this country are being killed at 6.9% per 100,000. White Americans are being killed at 3.3% per 100,000. Asian and Pacific Islanders are being killed at 1.7% per 100,000. Now look at the difference between American Indians and Alaskan Native persons, which is second at 12.9% compared to 33.6% of Black Americans, are being killed. Homicide rates, that's a homicide rate, 33%. 33.6%, almost 34% homicide rate in the Black community. Now, is that not troubling? That's troubling to me. And we're not just talking about 1 year, we're talking about the last 60 years. And it's not getting any better. Now, whatever you want to call it, and some of you out there calling it that it's not as bad as it is in other communities, that's just not true. And I'm going to push back against you, and I'm going to challenge you on that because it's not true. I've been doing 10-point, walking the streets of Indianapolis with other clergy and ex-offenders that we call OGs. I know what we have seen over the last 25 years in the work that I do in Indianapolis. with the Indianapolis 10-Point Coalition. I know what's happening in cities all across the country. I'm considered one of the expert practitioners when it comes to urban youth violence reduction because of the work that I've done. And it really goes back beyond 25 years because, as I've said to you earlier, I had a 21-year-old brother killed when I was 14 years old. His son was killed at 23 years old. I've had other family members that are killed. Now, I know I'm not saying what a lot of people want to hear, and I'm not here to do that. My podcast is not designed to say what you want to hear. I want to deal with the facts on the ground. And I'm troubled by a lot of things. I was just reading an article today, and this really got my blood boiling, got my blood boiling. I was reading an article today because it was dealing with the root causes of gun violence. And certainly most of the homicides that are occurring in the Black community are done by a gun. That's just factual. I'm not getting into the Second Amendment rights and all of that. I'm not trying to take anybody's gun. I'm just giving the facts of what's happening in the community. So in the article I read, they were talking about, what are the root causes of it. And I read down through the list, and I'm going to read some of that. And some of it I was concerned because I thought there were some things that was missing from the list that I believe are some of the root causes to the violence that we're seeing in urban cities. We're being affected by it as the Black community. It's in the area where my church is located. It is also in the area where I live, not as high in the area where I live at, but it's certainly very high in the area where I work at and where I pastor as the pastor of Barnes United Methodist Church. Here was the list. They were saying income inequalities was one, poverty was number two, underfunded public housing. We called that in my day when I was growing up because I lived in public housing, or what we called the projects. And I was told today by someone who worked for HUD is that over the last 30 years, we haven't built a lot of public housing. I'm not for sure that it's healthy. And I believe in more of blended communities and not just putting low income people in one area. I think when you do that, it produces crime and violence. You have single mothers that are in most cases are moving into this public housing. They tend to have, boyfriends, and some of the boyfriends, unfortunately, with some of them and what we see, may not have a job and may be involved in some aspect of criminal activity. Well, guess what happens? They bring it to the public housing. They recruit. And it's easy to recruit young people, these teens and adolescents who may not have much income, their families may not, because of the fact that their parent may not be making enough money is the reason why they live in public housing and the projects. And many of these kids are being recruited to sell drugs, to be in gangs, and to be in cliques. So I wasn't for sure on this list of root causes of the violence, unfunded public housing. I'm not for sure that public housing, the way we have it constructed today, and particularly over the last 40 years, 50 years, has been very helpful. That's just my opinion. When you go into large cities across the country, you can almost drive through and you know what is a high crime area. You can tell. And in a lot of times, these apartment complexes in these low income areas of the city, unfortunately, tend to be areas where we're having a lot of high crime and violence. That's just the reality of it. I would like to see more blended communities where there's a blend of low income, middle income, and higher income. That's the way it used to be in the Black community before, integration. We all lived in the same part of the city. And because of that, there were neighborhood and community norms that were established that everybody had to abide by. That's not the case anymore. Those of us who are middle class blacks like myself and my family, a lot of cases we tend to move into the suburbs or move into what we consider a safe area of the city. And in the area where my church is located, it tends to be predominantly low income, not exclusively, but predominantly low income, which produces, I know some of you don't want to hear this, a high level of crime and violence. Number 4 was under-resourced public services. Number 5 was underperforming schools. I want to get into that. Number 6 was the lack of opportunities. Number 7 was hopelessness. And number 8 was easy access to firearms by high risk, I would say, youth, adolescents now, because they're getting them at a young age now, and certainly offenders who are not supposed to, possess a gun anymore. What I thought was missing off the list, which I think is at the top of the list, which is the broken black families. I believe that should be at the top of the list. I believe that is a major cause of what we are seeing as a result of broken families, where today 74% of black children are born into single-parent households. Predominantly, it is the mother. That sadly, in too many of the cases, not every one of them, the father is not there. And sadly, in some cases, the father who is there is part of the problem, because the father is not a good role model and example for their child or children, because they may have been involved in criminal activity and drug trafficking themselves. I believe what Moynihan wrote in 1965, the Moynihan Report, if you're not familiar with that report, Moynihan was concerned in 1965 with broken family structures, and he believed that it was the cause, even in the late 60s, early 70s. When I was a child and in the late 70s, a teenager, was the cause of urban violence. And it created, which was controversial, this term, super predators, those who were most likely to be involved in crime and violence and had no moral compass. I believe that that's what you're seeing today in many of the shootings that we're seeing taking place in cities all across the country, where individuals are firing into crowds, firing into houses and cars, when they know innocent people are there, but because they have no regard for the sanctity of human life and no moral compass, that they're willing to shoot others to get the target of the person they're trying to hit. And this is very concerning. So the family structure and the fatherlessness, it is a major issue. We cannot ignore that. Not that there's not great mothers out there that are doing a super job in raising their children. But I'm one that came from that. I was fortunate enough that my mother remarried and I had an awesome stepdad. But I grew up angry. I grew up angry that my biological father did not have anything to do with me. I grew up angry about that. I didn't understand it. I really didn't meet my father until I was about 19 or 20 years old. That's the truth. Never did anything for me. So I really had no relationship with my dad. Fortunately for me, I had a great grandfather, stepdad. Stepdad raised me like I was his own son, role model for me, grandfather was, and I had 2 awesome uncles. So I had 4 men that played a prominent role in my life. Unfortunately, my brother who was killed, who was my stepbrother, he lived in Louisville, Kentucky with his mother. He didn't have, in my opinion, the same kind of role models around him that I had around me. He was given a lot more freedom to do stuff at a young age that I was not given the freedom to do, because I lived with his father, and my stepdad, and my mother, and then my grandfather and my uncles. They had these boundaries that they set for me, and there were rules, and I couldn't go anywhere I wanted to go. I had a curfew when I had to be in. And it was that structure in my life that I think saved my life. And those men became the role models in which I tried to model my life after. I had a lot of friends that did not have that. I had a lot of friends who did have that. And I think you could see the difference in my friends who had it, my friends who didn't. Now, some of my friends who didn't ended up doing well, particularly, my good friend Leroy. We went to high school together. We went to college together, got our college degrees at Indiana University. He went into the service and was a paratrooper. Moved up the ranks, and came out of the service very successfully and came out in the private sector and did really well. Leroy's dad was not there living in the household, but Leroy had a strong mother, and there were a lot of positive men in Leroy's life, and we were the best of friends. In a lot of cases, we're not seeing that today, and that's why I believe that the family structure is key. I don't disagree with all of these other things that people list as root causes of the violence. But I believe that if we're ever going to fix this problem, we have to rebuild the family. Now, how we do that, I'm not clear and certain. But there has to be some initiative that addresses the problem of 74% of Black children being born in the single-parent households. And in some cases, when there's multiple children in the household, you may not have the income coming in to take care of all of those children and provide food and clothing, because a lot of these kids, and it just happened last night, I took my 2 kids to the show, and they brought 3 other friends with them. When I dropped the kids off at the show, and later came back to pick them up, I noticed that there was only 4 kids rather than 5. And I asked my son, "Where's your friend at? Keyshawn." And he said, "Well, Keyshawn, went home because he didn't have the money to get into the show, and he was hoping that you would pay for him to get in the show." I said, "Well, to my son, I didn't know that he didn't have any money. Y'all let me drive off, without telling me that he didn't have any money. Certainly, I would have paid for him to get into the show." And I started sharing with my son, there's a lot of young people out there because their parents may not be able to afford it. They're struggling with the job that they have. And I said, "You're blessed that you have 2 parents who make pretty good money, and we're able to do for you and Jalen what a lot of kids are not blessed enough to have." And a lot of these kids in the work that I do with 10 Point are the kids that the drug dealers and the gangs are targeting. And it's an illusion that they're giving these kids that somehow the little money that they have in selling drugs and being involved in criminal activity is going to give them the kind of money that they're looking for in order to get some of the stuff out of life that they want. So that's why I'm pushing this whole family thing, because I know what I needed when I was growing up as a young man. I needed my dad in my life. I needed my grandfather or the positive role models I had with my uncles. I think moms do a great job. But my mother was not my dad. And my dad started dealing with those issues of helping to prepare me to be a man. In the conversations I had with my stepdad and my grandfather and my uncles about manhood and being a man and what it meant to be a man and being responsible. Plus, they had their I would say, foot on my neck, and there were certain things that they wouldn't let me do. There were certain people they wouldn't let me hang around with. They didn't give me absolute freedom to come and go as I please. That wasn't happening in the household. I knew what the line in the sand was. I knew how far I could go. And they made that clear. I don't think there's any real solution to addressing urban violence that we've been dealing with for now 60 years, or what I call black on black violence, if we don't rebuild the family. I'm not disregarding all the other root causes that people say are root causes. I think two-parent households have a better chance of making it if both parents are working than one parent, unless they have a real good job. Me and my wife shares responsibilities with our kids. Maybe I may not be available and she is. She may not be available and I am. Sometimes we're both available. But my kids never have to go anywhere without one of us being there. We're always in their lives, a part of their lives, as long as they're living under our household. Here's some other things that should be troubling. Gun violence in the Black community is the leading cause of death for Black males under 55 years old. Did you hear what I just said? The leading cause of death for Black men in America, 55 years and under, is gun violence. It is the leading cause of death. 55, from 1 year old to 55 years old. Our community, us Black men, have to worry about that. I grew up in that. I have two sons that I'm concerned about. I have two daughters now I'm concerned about. $7,800 Black Americans are murdered each year in this country by gun violence, and we represent 12% of the population, but every year we're about 50% of the homicide deaths in America. Get that? And then we're saying that there's not a problem, that our problem is not greater than anyone else's problem? Come on. We're 12% of the population, but yet we're 50% of the homicide victims. We represent 33.6% per 100,000. That's the homicide rate in the Black community. Way ahead of everybody else. This is alarming. I've been here in Indianapolis now for 31 years, and we have seen a rise in homicides in the city over the last 8 years, 10 years really. It's 10 years because it really started the end of the Ballard administration when I think we started politicizing public safety in the city. But as we have seen the rise in homicides in Indianapolis, we've seen a rise in homicides within the Black community. I think almost every year since then, we have been between 70 and 80% of the homicide victims in the city. So as the homicide numbers rise, the number of Blacks that are killed, that number is rising. We have a problem. We can't keep ignoring it. Some of the stuff we can't blame on racism. I'm sorry. There's some stuff going on within the Black community that we have to address. And certainly over the last 60 years, we have not addressed it. Because the problem has not gone away. It's not really gotten any better. And if we don't address it as Black Americans, it's not going to get addressed. We got to stop depending on these politicians and these political parties to fix this problem that is affecting us. We're impacted by it. I don't care if you elect President Biden or President Trump in November. The problem is not going away until we address it. We have to take part in addressing the problem, Black America, in our community. And we have to be honest and have an honest conversation within the Black community about what's really happening. We have conservatives, we have moderates, we have liberals, progressives, whatever you want to call yourself, is that this has been a 60-year problem. Gangs started to develop in the 1960s through migration, particularly on the West Coast and on the East Coast in many of our major cities. That's when the development of the Bloods and the Crips occurred in South Central Los Angeles. And we look at Chicago, what was happening in Chicago with the Black Gangster Disciples and the Vice Lords. I mean, we can go back. This stuff was going on when I was a teenager, which was in the 70s. I was born in 1960. In the midst of the civil rights movement for racial justice and equality, as those battles were being fought in the South, in other parts of the country, we were seeing the emergence of gangs and criminal activity that has not been addressed. I'm saying, Black America, we have to address this. We have to come together and address it because we have a problem. We cannot ignore this. We do have a problem. We have a problem of black-on-black violence. You don't want me saying it publicly, but people are talking about it in their homes, in the beauty salon, in the barber shop, on the street corners, in churches, in family gatherings. That's what they're saying. But some of you don't want me to say it publicly because it makes us look bad. No, everybody knows what's going on. People are watching the news. People knows what's happening in these cities. We can bury our head in the sand and pretend like it's not happening, but it is. And let's get real about what's driving it. If you don't fix the family and we don't do something about the fatherlessness in these communities, particularly with these young men, then we're going to continue to have this problem in Black America. I'm about solution. I know how I survived it. I know the challenges that I had growing up as a Black male in this country. I know the challenges of a father trying to raise young men in a time that is even more difficult for him today than what it was when I grew up or even when my brother was killed in 1975. But we can't keep blaming everything that's happening to us on other people. Yes, they have a part to play. Yes, I agree with that. But so do we. And we have to address that. It's our kids that are dying. And I'm not even talking about the mass incarceration that is created. Because many of them are either dying or they're going to prison or they're part of the judicial system. Is that what we want? I know some of you are saying, well, I'm not okay with that. Well, I know you're not. But if we're not going to get to the root causes of it, and the breakdown in the Black family is at the top of the list. We can do better than this. Yeah, I'm having conversations with my daughters and my sons, my boys. Now, don't just lay with some girl and you get her pregnant and you have no responsibility for that child. No, I'm not with that. And my daughters. Because he makes you feel good or he's giving you attention. You're going to have sex with him and then you're going to have a child or two and then you're left to raise them. And a lot of these girls can't live their life and pursue their dream because now they have the responsibility of being a parent. And some of them don't want really that responsibility. They're trying to parent and also be young. No, let's have some real conversations. If you have the child, then you're responsible for being the parent, whether you're married or not, because that child needs you in their life. Not just the boys, but fathers, the girls need you. And as long as we're having 74% of Black children born in the single-parent households, we're going to have a problem with urban violence because it starts at home. Not just there, but it starts at home. That's the reason we have a problem downtown Indianapolis on Saturday nights. Well, all these unsupervised young people are hanging out down there. If the household was stronger, and if fathers and mothers were being fathers and mothers, you wouldn't have 400 unsupervised kids down there and a portion of that group carrying guns and acting out. No, that starts at home. And all it does is produce more and more black-on-black violence. No, we got to step up. Black America, we got to step up. All of us. I'm not just a pastor and a community leader. I'm a father. I have 4 children. I have a responsibility. I'm going to be a grandfather. Hopefully I can live long enough to be a great-grandfather. We have a responsibility. Let's deal with all these root causes, but let's start at home first. It starts at home. We have to rebuild these families. Fathers, you got to step up. You got to be fathers to your sons and daughters. If we want to lower the homicide rate among black Americans, where it's down where all the other races is, then it starts at home. Families, you got to encourage education at home. I have 4 kids. 2 of them have their college degrees. 1 have a master's. I got 1 that just graduated from high school. I got another one that's now going into the 12th grade. Education is a priority at home. Or if you don't want your education, you're going to go to a trade school. You're going to get skilled up so you can get a job somewhere where you can make a good living for yourself. That starts at home. All of my kids came through IPS, got good educations. 2 went to college. 1 went to grad school because we prioritize education. You're not going to be no dummy in our household. No. Me and your mother went to school. We got our education. Then we got married. Now we have a family. We can deal with this, but we got to be honest, Black America. And I'm going to keep sounding the trumpet until we address this problem of black-on-black violence. There are a lot of tentacles to it, but one of the main ones is fixing the home. This is Rev Harrison. This is Real Talk. I hope you enjoyed this broadcast. For those of you who want to follow me, you can follow me on the All Indiana Podcast Network. I will also have this on X and on Facebook, and you can follow me. Matter of fact, as you already see, those who are following me, I'm live streaming on X right now. But follow me, share this, spread the word about my podcast, Real Talk. I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to tell from my perspective. It doesn't mean that it's right, but from my perspective, it's the truth. And I share what I see, what I feel. I don't get into the politics. I just try to be real. This is Rev Harrison with Real Talk. I pray that you have a blessed and awesome day. Spread the word. Share this on X so other people can hear it. Bless you and have an awesome day.
This is Real Talk with Reverend Charles Harrison.
Be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast.
And be sure to check out other great podcasts on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Online now at allindianapodcast.com.